Is the flesh made of dogmatism and superstition and otherworldliness? Is that part of what gives it its shape and necessity? I think traditionally, historically, it has been, and that's been the problem with religion. If you denude it of everything that is unjustifiable in the light of 21st century science and rationality, I think what you have to get down to is something quite a bit more universal and less provincial than any specific religion. Magic is a decent analogy. There's a difference between, like, paradoxically, real magic is fake magic, and fake magic is real magic. The only real magic in the world produced by magicians is the fake magic, where the magician, like someone like Darren Brown, will tell you, actually, no, I can't read minds, and I did put the rabbit in the hat, and this is fake, but the surprise is that even knowing it's fake, you can't understand how this effect is being achieved. Whereas the fake magicians are the ones who are pretending to be real, who are hiding, who are not acknowledging the mechanics, the real mechanics behind what is in fact effective. You know, the illusion that the rabbit pops out of the hat. And what I worry with some of the way in which you discuss the power of story, the power of metaphor, and the religious anchoring there, is that the leverage and the utility can be had even while acknowledging the real mechanics of it. You know, the fakeness of the magic, right? And you seem to suspect that it can't, that takes all of the wind out of the sails.
I'm not so sure what of it's fake and what of it isn't. Well, so I would say that I do consciously participate in the process that you described. But you see, I would also make the case, and this is certainly one of the things that we've been discussing, that you do it unconsciously. And let me make the case for that for a minute, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'd like to see your response. So I really read The Moral Landscape a lot, and I thought about it a lot, you know, and so this is what it looks like to me. So you make the proposition that we have to breach the gap between facts and values, because otherwise our values are left hanging unmoored, and that certainly brings about the danger of nihilism, but also a potential danger of swing to totalitarianism, something we agree about. I truly do believe that.
Right.
And then you perform an operation, a conceptual operation, and you say, surely we can all agree that, and then you outline a story about this woman who lives in this horrible country, who's basically just being starved and disease-ridden and tortured her whole life and having just a hell of a time of it, to put it in a phrase. And then you say, well, surely we can all agree that that's not good. And then you contrast that with, at least in principle, the sort of life that we would all like to have if we could choose the life that we have. And then you say, well, we could start with the proposition that we should move away from this terrible, hellish circumstance, and we should move towards this more ideal perspective. And you say, if we could only agree on that, then. And so,
right.
Like, so far so good. But there's a couple of things that go along with that are quite interesting. And so the first is that actually what you're claiming is that the highest moral good isn't existing in that better space. The highest moral good is acting in the manner that moves us from the hellish domain to the desirable domain. It seems to me to be implicit in your argument. So there's a pattern of behavior that constitutes the ethic.
Well, I would say that existing in that better space is good enough as well. So, I mean, there's the question of what it takes to move from where you are to someplace better, and then there's just the someplace that's better.
There's both of those.
Yeah.
Well, but perhaps we could say, look, what's the ultimate hell? It might be existing in the hell that you described, but it also might be, this is something worse, I think. I think that participating in the process that brings about that hell is actually a hell that's even deeper than the hell. So it's an analogous argument. There's the state of being in a good state, but there's also the state of being that brings you to that good state, and then there's the state of being that's a terrible state, and the process that brings you to that terrible state. And one of the things that I've learned from the archetypal and religious texts that I've studied, as well as the philosophical texts, is that the process that transforms society into something approximating hell is a lower hell. Now,
Well,
the reason...
well, let me just close the loop on that, because I'm pretty sure I disagree. One, you can imagine two counterexamples. One is you can imagine a sadistic being, we might even call him God, who would create a circumstance of hell and populate it with innocent souls, right? Now that's, presumably, that action, it need not be attended by a lot of suffering. Or you could imagine some...
No, but it's still wrong.
Oh, so totally
it's still
wrong.
wrong.
Yes.
No,
yes.
You could even imagine someone who enjoys generating
exactly.
hell.
Yes, it could be a source
but that would even be
perverse
more wrong than not enjoying it.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so we want to separate out two things. We want to separate out these states of being and the process that brings them into being. And I do believe you do that in your work, because basically what you suggest is that the appropriate way to act ethically is to act in a manner that moves us away from hell and moves us towards a desirable state. Now the thing is that as far as I'm concerned, there's a couple of things about that. The first thing is that I wouldn't say that that mode of acting is a fact. I would say it's a personality. And that what you're suggesting is that people embody the personality that moves society away from hell towards heaven, for lack of a better term. And the reason I make that argument is because I think that you recapitulate the essential Christian message precisely by doing that, because symbolically speaking, at least as far as I can understand, stripped of its of its metaphysical context, let's say, that the purpose of positing the vision of the ideal human being, which, independent of the metaphysical context, it's certainly what the symbol of Christ represents, is the mode of being that moves us most effectively from something approximating hell to something approximating heaven. And then part of that message is, and this is also something that's dead along the lines of what you're arguing, is that the best way to embody that is actually to live in truth. I mean, so because I would say that the fundamental Christian ethic, metaphysics accepted once again, is to act in love, which is to assume that being is acceptable and can be perfected, and to pursue that with truth, and that you should embody that. And then I would say that the purpose of the representation, we could call them metafictions or archetypal representations, is to show that in embodied format so that it can be imitated, rather than to transform it into something that's diluted in some sense to an abstract rationality. Because I don't think the abstract rationality in itself has enough flesh on it, so to speak, which is partly why in the Christian ethic there's an emphasis that the word, which is something roughly akin to rationality, has to be made flesh. It has to be enacted.
But is the flesh made of dogmatism and superstition and otherworldliness? Is that part of what gives it its shape and necessity? I think traditionally, historically, it has been, and that's been the problem with religion. If you denude it of everything that is unjustifiable in the light of 21st century science and rationality, I think what you have to get down to is something quite a bit more universal and less provincial than any specific religion, much less Christianity per se.
Well, it's interesting too, though, that one of the points that you do make is that you do appeal to or assume the existence of a transcendental internal ethic, something like that, which I would say, by the way, just since we're going down this direction, seems to me to be something very akin to the idea of the Holy Spirit, which is something like the internal representation of a transcendent universal ethic. Now remember, I'm trying to strip these concepts of their metaphysical substrate. I'm not making a case at the moment for the existence of the great man in the sky. We can get to that later. I'm saying that what seems to be the case is that we have underneath our cognitive architecture and our social architecture a layer of symbolic and dramatic and narrative representation that instantiates the same concepts, but in a multi-dimensional context. One of the things we talked about in Vancouver, for example, is that the religious enterprise doesn't only emphasize rationality. It brings music into the play, and it brings art into the play, and it brings drama, and it brings literature, and it brings architecture, and it brings the organizing of cities around a central space. Like it's pushing itself, it's manifesting itself across multiple dimensions of human existence simultaneously. And to me, that gives it a richness that cannot be diluted without loss, and also a motive power that a pure appeal to rationality, I don't think can manage. And this is, see, one of the things, this is maybe a good place for Douglas to leap in. See, one of the things that Douglas, who's claimed upon multiple occasions to be an atheist, and I don't know how he's feeling about that at the present time.
Yes, well,
but it doesn't matter. One of the things
you're in good company,
Douglas has pointed out was that there are things that we've done in free countries, let's say, broadly speaking, in the West, that are worth protecting. And that in order to protect them in the longest sense, it's conceivable that we need a cognitive structure, something like that, that can act as a bulwark against those forces that would seek to undermine and destroy it. And Douglas has been driven, I would say, to some degree, to hypothesize that for Christianity, for all its faults, or we could say Judeo-Christianity to broaden it, for all its faults, might provide something approximating that bulwark if we could only figure out how to utilize it properly. So,
yes. I mean, one of my problems on this is that it seems that we are where we are with belief, whether we wish it to be or not. We cannot believe as our predecessors believed, even if we wanted to. We know too much more now, and it puts us in this very difficult position. But to denude ourselves of the entire story seems to me to be a fool's errand, for a set of reasons. One of which is that from a lot of travel, a lot of speaking to people from all around the world, it doesn't seem at all obvious to me that what we have in countries like this one is the default position of human beings. In fact, it strikes me as being very rare. Order, even political order, political liberalism, political freedom, very, very unusual things. And if you like the things that helped to get you there, with all of the caveats we could throw in all evening. And it's not the only thing that got us there, obviously. But that if you like, broadly speaking, where we are, you've got to be very suspicious at the very least of saying, the whole story's no good, we don't need the story, we can move on. I quote quite often the radical theologian Don Cupid, who was often described as an atheist priest. And Cupid says somewhere in a recent book, he said, you know, we can't help it. He said, for instance, the dreams we dream are still Christian dreams, whether we like that fact or not. And without being able to believe myself, certainly not being able to be a literal believer, I worry. Yeah, I worry about what happens when the square is denuded completely. And that's why this discussion tonight, and you two in particular, are right on the cusp of this, because this is where I think a lot of us are. Even if we really wanted to believe, we basically can't. And by the way, very quickly, that's why I think there's an additional, just to refine my previous point to you, Sam, that's why there's this additional thing. I think there is a fear, which you may have, which I also have, which is if there's a risk that even what I've just said, never mind what Jordan has also said, there's a risk, I think some people feel, that you're going to soften up the land somehow. And that even if neither Jordan nor I are going to suddenly start Jesus smuggling, we might create the conditions that make it easier for someone else to do that.
Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, and it is. Yeah.
No photos.
This is very Christian of you.
Thank you.
Yes. So.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can sharpen up what my concern actually is here, because it's not even true to say that I think you need to get rid of the Jesus story, or even not. I don't even think there's something problematic with orienting your life around the Jesus story. I think that can be reclaimed. But so, for instance, I was walking yesterday in this fine city of yours and saw someone on the sidewalk giving tarot readings to people. He had a tarot deck spread out. He had a few cards spread out, and he was soliciting people. And I'm sorry to say I didn't sit for a reading, but tarot cards, if you're familiar with them, are the quintessential artifact of New Age woo, right? I mean, these are not thought of as legitimate tools of divination, except by people who think that they're legitimate tools of divination. And yet, a tarot reading can be truly powerful, right? I mean, this is built on something, right? This is not just a massive example of self-deception on the part of people reading and people getting their cards read. These cards can seem prescient. I could give you all a reading right now, and 95% of you would find what the cards would say to be relevant to your lives. I mean, I could do it with an imaginary deck. I mean, an invisible imaginary deck. I don't know anything about tarot cards, but I'm going to turn over 2 cards now. One is the Sun, and the other is the Fallen Man. Now, I know so little about tarot that I'm not even sure the Fallen Man is a tarot card. Right? Or I think it was the Hanged Man as a tarot card, right?
Man, yeah.
Okay, so I've got these 2 cards. And, the Sun is clearly the representation of wisdom, right? And the Hanged Man is the representation of lost opportunity. And I can tell you with some degree of certainty that all of you are at a crossroads in your life, right? Where you have good reason to believe that you're not making the most of your opportunities, right? Now, I could go on like this for an hour, right? And pretend all the while that it has something to do with the cards actually working in concert with the dynamics of the cosmos, such that these cards that I turn over, were they real, would be the ones that of necessity were revealing something about your mind in this moment. And obviously people think in these terms about astrology and sympathetic magic and all the rest, and religion is built upon this kind of superstition. There's a way of understanding the utility of using a device like this and the real effect it has on you. I mean, if I turn over the cards and ask you to look at your life in this moment as though for the first time through this lens, considering in this case lost opportunities, right? Of course it's going to be valid. That doesn't make it, it can be an incredibly useful thing to do. My main concern is that at no point do you have to lie to yourself about your state of knowledge about the mechanism, right? You don't have to believe tarot cards really work.